The sword came down in a silver arc, and Cale Thornwood knew his men were watching him die. Not from the blade itself, that he could handle. 6 inches of northern steel aimed at his throat was a problem he had solved 1,000 times in 2 centuries of war. No, what would kill him was the beast clawing its way up from the darkness inside his chest, summoned by the scent of blood and the thunder of his own heartbeat. The curse always came when the fighting peaked, when his tactical mind was needed most. It came like a traitor in the night, and it would make him slaughter the very soldiers he was sworn to protect. Cale rolled left, felt the blade kiss the air where his neck had been. His opponent, a massive wolf from Iron Peak Pack, with scars like road maps across his chest, pressed the advantage. Good tactical instinct. Never give a downed enemy time to recover. Cale had taught that principle to 3 generations of warriors. Now it was being used to kill him. The beast surged. Black fire crawled up the inside of his vision, threading through the gold of his wolf sight. His hands, still human but clawed at the fingertips, dug furrows in the frozen earth. Hold. He could hold it. Just a few more seconds, just until he could signal Cormac to pull the men back, to retreat before the curse turned him into the monster his father had died believing him to be. "Your Majesty!" Cormac's voice cut through the roar of battle, rough as gravel and sharp as command. "Fall back! Now!" The Iron Peak warrior above him hesitated. Fatal mistake. In that half-second of distraction, Cale swept the man's legs, rose, and delivered a strike that sent his opponent sprawling into the snow. He did not kill him, could not risk it. Every death fed the beast, and the beast was already screaming for release. "Retreat!" Cale's voice was his own, but only barely. He could hear the growl underneath it, the grinding of stone on stone that meant his humanity was slipping. "Cormac, sound the withdrawal!" The horn blast echoed across the ridge, a lonely wail that spoke of survival, not victory. His men pulled back in formation, disciplined even in retreat. They were good soldiers. He had trained them well, and they deserved better than a king who could not stand on a battlefield without becoming the enemy. The Iron Peak wolves did not pursue. They stood at the tree line, watching with eyes that reflected the winter sun like coins of cold light. Waiting. They knew what everyone on this mountain knew. The Alpha King of Shadow Peak Citadel was broken, and a broken king was no king at all. Cale made it to the castle gates before the transformation took him. He had just enough control left to seal himself in the lower armory, a room of stone and iron where the beast could rage without killing. The last thing he saw before the curse consumed him was Cormac's face through the closing door. Concern, yes, but underneath it, something worse. Resignation. The look of a first commander who knows his king is already lost. Then there was only darkness and pain and the sound of his own claws tearing at stone. 6 months. It had been 6 months since that battle, since Cale had admitted the truth that every scout report and every council meeting had been screaming at him. He could no longer lead his people in war. The curse made him a liability, and Alpha Garrick of Iron Peak Pack knew it. The raids had intensified, villages burned, supply lines collapsed, and Cale, the legendary commander who had held 3 kingdoms together during the Ogre Wars, could do nothing but watch from his frozen fortress as his territory bled. There was one option left. One final strategy he had resisted for 200 years because it required something he had sworn never to do again. It required hope, and hope was the cruelest lie the universe could tell a man who had murdered his own brother with an act of love. The moon contract. He stood now in his study, the setting sun painting the mountains beyond his window in shades of blood and gold. The parchment lay on his desk, ancient and terrible, inscribed with terms that would bind a human witness to 7 nights of trials. In exchange, the contract would grant a miracle, 1 life saved, 1 death unmade. It was the same magic that had destroyed him, refined and repurposed by entity scholars who believed they could control what should never have been summoned in the first place. 3 times before, Cale had tried this. 3 times, the witnesses had broken before the 7th dawn, driven mad by the curse's hunger, or fleeing into the night when they understood the true cost of their bargain. Each failure had left him weaker, the beast stronger. This would be his last attempt. If the 4th witness failed, there would not be a 5th. The curse would finally consume what little remained of Cale Thornwood, and the beast would rule in his place. "The village is chosen," Maeve said from the doorway. She had been his mother's closest friend, a woman who had advised queens and buried kings. Age had turned her hair silver and carved lines deep into her face, but her eyes remained sharp as broken glass. Borderland settlement, 300 souls. The plague has them. Cale did not turn from the window. How many dead? 30 so far, more by morning. She moved into the room with the quiet grace of someone who had walked these halls for 150 years. There is a woman, a healer's daughter. Her mother is dying. And she will sign? She will do anything to save her. Maeve placed a sealed letter on his desk. Finn is ready to leave at first light. He will bring her back, or he will bring news of another failure. Cale finally turned. Maeve met his gaze without flinching, though few could manage that anymore. His eyes, even in human form, carried too much of the beast. Gold shot through with veins of black, windows into a soul that was more curse than man. If she fails, he said quietly, I want you to leave. Take Cormac, take Finn. Go to Oakvale Pack. Sienna will take you in. I will not. That was not a request, old friend. When the beast breaks free, it will kill everyone in this castle. I will not have your death on my conscience alongside all the others. Maeve's smile was sad and stubborn in equal measure. Your mother made me promise to stay until you found peace. I have never broken a promise to Isolde Thornwood, and I will not start now, even if she has been ash and memory for 80 years. They stood in silence, two relics of a better age, watching the sun die behind the mountains. Tomorrow, a woman would come. Tomorrow, the last gamble would begin. And in 7 days, one way or another, the matter would be settled. Cale Thornwood would be free, or the beast would be sovereign, or they would both be dead. Any of those outcomes, he thought, would be an improvement. The plague came to Rivermouth the way it always did, quiet as a thief in the hours before dawn. Mira Ashford woke to the sound of her mother's labored breathing and knew, with the cold certainty of a healer's daughter, that they were out of time. The room was dark. The fire burned down to embers. Mira crossed to her mother's bedside, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Alara Ashford had been a beauty once, strong and bright as summer, but the sickness had carved her hollow. Her skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that seemed too large for her wasting frame. The fever sweat that soaked her nightgown smelled wrong, sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. "Mama," Mira touched her mother's forehead, hot, too hot. "I am here." Alara's eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. "Marcus?" Her voice was a ruined whisper. "Marcus, is that you?" Mira's throat tightened. Marcus Ashford had been dead for 15 years, killed in the last year of the Ogre Wars when a siege engine misfired and crushed him along with 6 other soldiers. He had taught Mira to read terrain before he taught her to read books, to think 3 moves ahead before she made the first. "War is chess, little bird," he had told her, "and chess is won by the one who sees the whole board, not just the next piece. It is Mira, Mama, your daughter." "Oh." Disappointment flickered across Alara's fever-bright eyes, then confusion. "Where am I?" "Home. You are home. But for how much longer?" Mira had watched 30 people die from this plague in the past 2 months. She knew its progression the way a soldier knows the stages of a siege. First came the fever, then the sweats, then the wasting, and finally the bleeding from the lungs that marked the end. Her mother was in the 3rd stage. She had days at most, perhaps only hours. The village healer, old Torin with his clouded eyes and shaking hands, had done what he could. Herbs to ease pain, poultices to draw the fever. It was not enough. It was never enough. This sickness did not respond to conventional medicine, and the nearest city with advanced healers was a week's travel. Her mother did not have a week. Mira sat with her until the sun rose, pale and cold through the window. When Alara finally slipped back into restless sleep, Mira allowed herself to do what she had forbidden for 2 months. She allowed herself to weep, silent tears that tracked hot down her face and dripped onto the worn blanket. She wept for her mother, for the 30 dead, for the village that was slowly dying while the war in the mountains raged and no help came. The knock at the door came an hour past dawn. Mira wiped her eyes, composed herself, and opened the door to find 2 men standing in the snow. One was young, perhaps 30, with a face like carved stone and eyes that saw too much. He wore the leather armor of a scout, unmarked but well-maintained, and moved with the coiled stillness of a trained warrior. The other was hooded, his face hidden, but Mira caught a glimpse of gray beneath the cloak. An older man then, a veteran. "Mira Ashford?" The young one's voice was quiet, respectful. He had the accent of the mountain packs, vowels clipped and consonants hard. "I am. My name is Finn. I serve Shadow Peak Citadel." He glanced past her, into the dim interior of the cottage. "Your mother is ill." It was not a question. Mira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "How did you know?" "We know the plague has come to Rivermouth. We know it is killing your people." Finn reached into his jacket and withdrew a roll of parchment, sealed with wax the color of old blood. "We can save her." The world seemed to tilt. Mira gripped the doorframe, suddenly dizzy. "What?" "There is a price." The hooded man spoke for the first time, his voice rough with age and smoke. "There is always a price, but the offer is real. Your mother will live. You have my word." "Who are you?" The hood fell back, revealing a face mapped with scars. An old soldier's face, hard and weathered, with eyes that had seen too many battles. "My name is Torin, elder of this village, former first scout of Thornwood Guard." He looked at her with something like pity. "I served under King Aldrich, God's rest him, and I served under his son before the curse took him." Mira's breath caught. Everyone in the borderlands knew the stories of the cursed king. Alpha Kael Thornwood, the brilliant commander who had won the Ogre Wars and then vanished into his mountain fortress, driven mad by a curse that turned him into a beast. The stories varied depending on who told them. Some said he had made a bargain with dark entities for power and paid the price. Others claimed he had been betrayed by a rival pack. A few whispered that he had brought the curse upon himself through an act of terrible love. "The king needs a witness," Torin continued. 7 nights. You will stand in his presence and observe his trials. If you complete the contract, your mother will be healed. Completely, permanently. Mira looked at the parchment in Finn's hand, then back at Torin. "And if I fail?" "Then nothing changes. Your mother remains as she is, and you are released from service." It was too easy, too convenient. Mira's father had taught her to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good, to look for the trap hidden in the generous terms. "What is the cost? What do you mean by trials?" Finn and Torin exchanged a glance. It was Finn who answered. "The king is cursed. Each night he undergoes a transformation. It is painful. It is dangerous. You will be required to witness this, to stand in his presence and remain until the trial ends. You will not be harmed, but you will see things that no human is meant to see." "Why does he need a witness?" "That is part of the magic that binds the curse. The details are complex, but the contract is clear. 7 nights. If you hold to the end, the magic will reward you with a miracle of your choosing, your mother's life." Mira looked back into the cottage where her mother lay dying. She thought of the 30 graves in the village cemetery, of the families torn apart by this plague. She thought of her father's lessons. Always look for the trap. But sometimes in war, you had to take the risk because the alternative was certain death. "Show me the contract." Finn handed her the parchment. Mira broke the seal and unrolled it. The text was written in a hand so precise it seemed carved rather than inked, and the words glowed faintly in the morning light, as if the paper itself was alive. "Contract of 7 nights," it began. "Terms of witness and miracle." The clauses were straightforward. She would travel to Shadow Peak Citadel. She would stand witness to King Kael Thornwood's trials for 7 consecutive nights. She would not flee, would not interfere, would not break the circle. In exchange, upon the 7th dawn, a miracle of healing would be granted to the person of her choosing. The magic would flow through the contract, permanent and irrevocable. At the bottom were 2 signature lines. One already bore a name in bold black ink: Kael Thornwood, Alpha King of Shadow Peak, Lord of Frostclaw Range. The other line was empty, waiting. Mira's eyes caught on the section near the end, printed in smaller script. Additional terms and conditions. She read it carefully, her father's voice in her head. "Read every word, little bird. The trap is always in the details." Clause 7. Upon completion of contract, witness assumes all debts of the contracted party. Clause 8. Debts include but are not limited to defense of realm, protection of pack, all duties and responsibilities inherent to the position of Alpha. Mira read it again, then a 3rd time. This says I would assume his responsibilities. What does that mean? Torin's expression was carefully neutral. It is a formality, legal language to ensure the magic binds properly. You are not a shifter, Mira. You could not be Alpha even if the contract demanded it. The clause is symbolic. But her father had taught her that nothing in a contract was symbolic. Everything meant something. She looked at Finn, who met her gaze without expression. He was a soldier. He had been given orders to bring her back, and he would do so with or without explanation. Inside the cottage, her mother coughed, a wet, rattling sound that Mira knew meant blood in the lungs. Hours, not days. If I sign this and fail, what happens to my mother? Nothing, Torin said. The contract only activates upon completion. Failure means the magic is never invoked. And what happens to the king? Finn's jaw tightened. It was the first crack in his stoic mask. He has tried this 3 times before. 3 witnesses who could not endure the 7 nights. If you fail, there will not be a 4th attempt. What happens to him if the contract is never completed? The curse consumes him, Torin said quietly. The beast takes permanent control, and when that happens, Alpha Garrick of Iron Peak will see it as an opportunity. He will invade. Thousands will die in the war that follows. There it was. The real cost. Not just her mother's life balanced against 7 nights of fear, but thousands of lives balanced against her courage. If she refused, her mother died, and the king fell, and the war came. If she accepted, she might save them all. Or she might fail, and all of it would be for nothing. Mira thought of her father, who had died defending strangers because he believed it was the right thing to do. She thought of the 30 graves and the empty space waiting for her mother. She thought of the village children who deserved a future that did not include plague and war. I need ink, she said. Finn produced a small vial and a quill. Mira took them, surprised to find her hand steady. She placed the parchment on the doorframe, dipped the quill, and signed her name in clear, careful letters. Mira Ashford, witness. The moment the ink touched the paper, the contract flared with light. Brilliant, blinding, a silver radiance that poured from the parchment like water from a broken dam. Mira gasped, stumbling back. The light surged past her, into the cottage, and she heard her mother cry out. Not in pain, in surprise. When the light faded, Mira ran inside. Alara was sitting up in bed, her eyes clear and focused for the first time in weeks. The fever flush was gone from her cheeks. The wasting had reversed, color returning to her skin like spring to frozen earth. She looked at her hands, turning them over in wonder. Mira? Her voice was strong, whole. What happened? I feel well. Mira's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. It had worked. The magic was real. Her mother was saved. Behind her, Finn's quiet voice cut through the moment. We leave at dawn tomorrow. Bring what you need for 7 days. Nothing more. Mira turned to find him standing in the doorway. The contract rolled and sealed once more. The silver light was gone, but she could still feel its echo in her bones, a humming pressure that spoke of power and price intertwined. Dawn, she repeated. Dawn, he confirmed. Then he and Torin were gone, melting into the winter morning like ghosts. Mira spent that day and night with her mother, memorizing her smile, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her hand. She did not tell Alara where she was going or why. She only said that she had business in the mountains, that she would return in 7 days. Her mother, still weak despite the miracle, did not question it. She simply held her daughter close and whispered blessings into her hair. When dawn came, Mira dressed in her warmest clothes, packed a small bag, and met Finn at the village edge. He was alone this time, mounted on a gray horse that watched her with unsettling intelligence. A second horse, smaller and brown, stood waiting. You can ride? Finn asked. Yes. Her father had taught her that too. A soldier's daughter learns to ride before she learns to dance. The journey into the Frostclaw Range took 3 days. They traveled in near silence, Finn speaking only to give directions or point out landmarks. The terrain grew progressively harsher as they climbed, the forest thinning to skeletal trees and bare stone. Mira saw signs of the war everywhere, burned villages, empty steadings, the scattered bones of livestock left to rot. These had been prosperous lands once. Now they were a graveyard. On the second day, they passed a settlement that had been abandoned so recently that cook fires still smoldered in the hearths. Finn paused, his expression grim. "Iron Peak Raiders," he said. "They have been pushing deeper into our territory for months, testing our defenses. Why does no one stop them?" Finn looked at her, and for the first time she saw genuine emotion in his stone-carved face. Grief. Who would lead the defense? A king who cannot trust himself on a battlefield? They rode on. That evening, camped in the shelter of a rocky overhang, Finn finally spoke more than a dozen words. "You are braver than the last 3, he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "They were frightened from the moment they signed. You seem calm." Mira considered that. "I am terrified," she admitted, "but fear is not useful. My father taught me that. You acknowledge it, then you put it aside and focus on the mission." "Your father was a soldier." "He was. Ogre Wars. He died at the siege of Granite Keep." Finn's expression shifted, something like respect entering his eyes. "I was at Granite Keep. King Kael led the defense. We held that fortress for 3 months against impossible odds. Your father died honorably." "Do you believe that matters? Honor?" "Yes." The answer was immediate, certain. Honor is what separates us from beasts. It is what makes a death meaningful, a life worth living. Mira poked the fire, watching sparks spiral up into the night. What happened to the other 3, the other witnesses? Finn was quiet for a long moment. The first one ran on the second night. The curse terrified her. She broke the circle and fled into the mountains. We found her 3 days later, half frozen, but alive. The second lasted until the 5th night. He was stronger, but the trials broke something in his mind. He began speaking to shadows, seeing things that were not there. We sent him home, but I heard he never recovered. The third... Finn's jaw tightened. The third was my brother. He made it to the 7th night, but at the end, when the magic should have activated, something went wrong. The contract burned. He survived, but the curse, it touched him. Just a fraction of what the king bears, but enough. He took his own life a month later. Mira felt ice settle in her stomach. "You did not think to mention this before I signed? Would it have changed your decision?" She thought of her mother, of the 30 graves, of the thousands who would die if the war came. "No. Then it would have been cruelty to burden you with it." They did not speak again that night. On the 3rd day, they reached Shadow Peak Citadel. It was not the Gothic nightmare of the stories. It was a fortress, pure and functional, carved from the living mountain itself. The outer walls were 50 feet high, made of black granite that seemed to drink the sunlight rather than reflect it. Guard towers punctuated the perimeter, their windows dark and watchful. The main gates were iron-reinforced wood, massive and scarred from old battles. As they approached, Mira glimpsed movement through an upper window, figures in armor, the glint of steel. This was not a haunted castle. This was a military command center, and it was preparing for something. The gates opened without sound, smoothly oiled and well-maintained. They rode into a courtyard where soldiers drilled in formation, their movements precise and deadly. A grizzled veteran with a face like weathered oak called out commands, his voice carrying across the space with the authority of a man who had spent a lifetime making other men obey. Finn dismounted and helped Mira down. The veteran approached, his eyes sweeping over her with the assessing gaze of a commander evaluating a new recruit. "This is her?" His voice was rough gravel. "This is Mira Ashford," Finn confirmed. "4th witness. She signed the contract 3 days ago." The veteran studied her for a long moment. Mira met his gaze, refusing to look away. Her father had taught her that too, never show weakness to a predator. Finally, the corners of the veteran's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "You have steel in you. Good. You will need it." He offered his hand. "Cormac Steelhand, 1st Commander of Thornwood Guard. I have been serving this family for 53 years, and I have never seen a darker time. If you can do what the others could not, you will have earned the gratitude of every soul in this citadel." Mira shook his hand. His grip was firm, the hand of a man who had held swords and shields and the weight of command. "I will do my best." "Your best had better be extraordinary." Cormac released her hand and gestured toward the main keep. "The king is in the war room. He will see you before tonight's trial. Finn, get her settled in the East Tower. Comfortable quarters. She is not a prisoner." "Sir?" Finn led Mira across the courtyard, through a set of heavy doors, and into the keep itself. The interior was warmer than she expected, lit by braziers that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. The corridors were wide and practical, with none of the decorative excess she associated with royal residences. This was a place built for function, not beauty. Maps and weapon racks lined the walls. Soldiers passed them in the halls, nodding respectfully to Finn and eyeing Mira with curious, wary glances. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to the East Tower. Finn opened a door and gestured her inside. The room was spacious and well-appointed, with a large bed, a fireplace already burning, and a window that looked out over the mountains. A tray of bread, cheese, and dried fruit sat on a small table. "Rest," Finn said. "Eat. Someone will come for you in 2 hours. The trial begins at dusk." "What should I expect?" Finn's expression was carefully blank. "Expect to be afraid. Expect to want to run. Do not run. Do not break the circle. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, you must hold your ground until the king releases you. That is the only rule. Break it, and the contract is void." "And if I hold?" "If you hold for 7 nights, you will have done something no one else could do. You will have saved a kingdom." He turned to leave, then paused. "My brother's name was Garrett. He was the bravest man I knew. If he could not endure this, I do not know how you will, but I hope you prove me wrong." Then he was gone, and Mira was alone. She stood at the window, looking out at the mountains, and wondered what kind of monster required a human witness to his suffering. She wondered what she would see when night fell. And she wondered, with a chill that sank into her bones, whether 7 nights from now she would still be herself, or whether the contract would take something from her that could never be returned. Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, and the castle's shadows grew long. The woman who came for her was not what Mira expected. She was old, ancient even, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and a face that had been beautiful once, but was now a landscape of wrinkles and hard-earned wisdom. She moved with a grace that spoke of nobility, and her eyes, when they met Mira's, were sharp and knowing. "I am Maeve," she said. Her voice was cultured, refined. "I served Queen Isolde before her death, and I serve her son now. Come, he is waiting." Mira followed her down through the keep, into corridors that grew progressively darker and colder. They passed the war room, where Cormac and several other commanders were deep in discussion over a map. One of them, a woman with a scar across her throat and hair the color of autumn leaves, looked up as they passed. "New witness?" she called out. "4th time is the charm," Cormac replied, but his tone was grim. They descended a final flight of stairs and emerged into a vast hall. This, finally, was what Mira had imagined. The throne room was cavernous, its ceiling lost in shadow. Pillars of black stone rose like the bones of giants, supporting arches that seemed too delicate for their weight. At the far end, on a raised dais of 3 steps, sat a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian. It was empty. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, large enough to roast an ox whole. Flames roared within it, casting the only light in the hall. The heat was intense but felt hollow, as if it warmed the skin but could not touch what lay beneath. "Wait here," Maeve said, and disappeared into the shadows. Mira stood in the center of the hall, her heart a steady drum in her chest. The firelight threw long shadows that danced and twisted like living things. She could feel the weight of the castle around her, the centuries of stone and sorrow. Then she felt him. A change in the air, a pressure that made her ears pop and her skin prickle. The scent of pine and cold mountain stone, mixed with something sharper. Ozone, like the moment before lightning strikes. The shadows near the dais seemed to deepen, to coalesce, and then he was there. King Cale Thornwood did not walk from a hidden door or emerge from the darkness. One moment the throne was empty, the next he occupied it, as if he had always been there and she had simply failed to notice. He was larger than any man she had ever seen, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of kingdoms. He wore simple black trousers and a loose-fitting shirt that did nothing to hide the raw, coiled power of his frame. His arms were roped with muscle, his hands scarred and calloused. But it was his face that held her, all harsh angles and brutal beauty, with a jawline that could have been carved by a sculptor and a nose that had been broken at least twice. A jagged scar ran from his left temple across the bridge of his nose and disappeared into the line of his jaw, a white seam in sun-darkened skin. His hair was dark and untamed, falling around his face in waves. And his eyes, they were the color of molten gold, burning with a light that was ancient and weary and utterly inhuman. They were not the eyes of a man. They were the eyes of something older, something that had seen too much and endured too long. He did not sit so much as lounge in the obsidian throne, one leg casually thrown over the armrest, as if the seat of kings was nothing more than a common chair. He studied her the way a wolf studies prey, with a stillness so complete it was unnerving. The silence stretched. Mira forced herself to meet his gaze, to stand straight and calm. Her father had taught her this too. Never show fear to a commander. Fear makes you weak, and weakness invites attack. Finally, Kael spoke. His voice was not the monstrous roar she had expected. It was a low, gravelly timbre, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It carried the weight of centuries, and it vibrated through the floor, up through the soles of her feet. Mira Ashford. It was not a question. He knew who she was. He probably knew everything about her. The contract would have told him. "Your Majesty," she replied, proud that her voice came out steady. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, but it did not reach his burning eyes. "You signed the contract." "I did." "You understand the terms? 7 nights, 7 trials. You will stand and you will witness and you will not flee." "I understand." He leaned forward slightly, the movement fluid and predatory. "The others fled, or they broke. Do you know why?" "I can imagine." "No." The word was a growl. "You cannot. Imagination is a pale shadow of reality. When the curse takes me, I become something that should not exist. I become the nightmare that mothers use to frighten children into obedience. And you, human and fragile, will be required to stand in the presence of that nightmare and hold your ground." "I signed the contract," Mira repeated. "I will honor it." Kael's eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that felt like it could peel back her skin and see the frightened girl beneath the calm exterior. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why did you sign? Your mother was dying. The contract offered a cure. But most people, when faced with the reality of what this entails, choose to let their loved ones die rather than face 7 nights of horror. Why are you different?" Mira thought about that, about her father, about the 30 graves, about the war that was coming. "Because this is not just about my mother," she said quietly. "I read the contract, all of it. I know what happens if you fall. I know about the war, about Alpha Garrick. I know that thousands of people will die if this contract is not completed. So I signed not just for my mother's life, but for theirs." Something flickered in his gaze. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold, predatory mask. "Noble sentiment. Let us see if your nobility survives the first night." He rose from the throne in a single fluid motion. Standing, he was even more imposing, a mountain of a man who dwarfed the massive seat. He descended the 3 steps of the dais and began to walk toward her. His boots made no sound on the stone floor despite his size. He moved like smoke, like shadow, the silent tread of a hunter. Mira held her ground, but it took every ounce of her will. He circled her slowly, like a wolf assessing prey. She forced herself to breathe evenly, to keep her hands loose at her sides. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "You have a soldier's bearing," he murmured, his voice a low growl just behind her ear. "Your father trained you well." "He did." "Did he teach you how to face a monster?" "He taught me how to face fear. He said it was the same skill." Kael came to a stop in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was an incredible heat, like standing near a forge. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Up close, the scar on his face was even more brutal, a testament to some long-ago violence. His eyes, those molten gold abysses, seemed to look straight through her. "Fear is useful," he said softly. "It keeps you alive. But tonight, your fear will try to make you run. You must be stronger than your fear. Do you understand?" "I understand. We will see." He raised his hand, and Mira saw that his fingers were long and calloused, the knuckles scarred from a lifetime of violence. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gesture toward a spot on the floor. A circle had been marked there in white chalk, about 6 feet in diameter. "You will stand inside the circle. You will not leave it no matter what happens. That is the rule. Break it, and the contract is void." Mira stepped into the circle. The moment her feet crossed the line, she felt something change. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if she had stepped underwater. The chalk marks began to glow faintly, a pale silver light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kael backed away, putting distance between them. He rolled his shoulders, a gesture that seemed almost human, almost nervous. "It will begin soon. When it does, do not speak to me. Do not try to help. Do not offer pity or compassion. To do so would be to feed the curse, and it is already too strong. Do you understand?" "Yes." He looked at her one last time, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected. Regret. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for what you are about to see." Then the change began. It started with a shudder that racked his massive frame. A low growl rumbled in his chest, involuntary and guttural, a sound of deep, primal pain. He clenched his fists, the knuckles turning white. The golden light in his eyes intensified, swirling like a storm. The shadows in the room seemed to respond, stretching toward him like living things, drawn to the curse that was rising within him. Black veins began to crawl up his neck, pulsing with a sickening, dark energy. His muscles bunched and writhed under his skin, his form seeming to shift and distort in the firelight. He fell to one knee, his head bowed, his breath coming in ragged, harsh pants. The growl deepened, became something less than human. Mira could see his hands changing, the nails thickening and darkening, elongating into vicious claws that scraped against the stone floor. He threw his head back, and a sound tore from his throat that was not human. It was a roar of agony and rage that shook the very stones of the hall, that echoed through the vast space like the cry of something ancient and terrible being born. Mira stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. This was the curse. This was what the contract demanded she witness, and it had only just begun. His form was shifting now, muscles rippling and bones cracking as the beast fought to emerge. The black veins spread across his chest, down his arms, a network of corruption that pulsed with each labored breath. His eyes, when they opened, were no longer gold. They were pools of black fire, shot through with veins of crimson. The man was gone, and something else was staring at her with an ancient, insatiable hunger. It did not attack. That was the first surprise. The beast could have crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat, could have torn through the chalk circle and ended her. But it did not. It knelt there, locked in some internal battle, fighting for control. And then she heard it, not with her ears, but in her mind. A voice, slick and persuasive, like oil on water. "He is in pain. You could ease his suffering. Just a word, just a touch of compassion." Mira gasped. The voice was not her own. It was the curse, speaking directly into her thoughts. She felt a pull, a compulsion to step forward, to offer comfort. Her heart ached with sympathy. This man, this king, was being tortured by something he could not control. How could she stand here and watch without doing something? The beast's head snapped up. It was looking at her now, truly seeing her. Its lips curled back to reveal elongated canines, and a low snarl rumbled through the hall. But underneath the snarl, she heard something else, a desperate, wordless plea. Do not give in." Mira clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to help. Every instinct screamed at her to do something, to offer words of kindness, to show him he was not alone in his suffering. But she remembered the contract. She remembered Finn's brother, driven mad. She remembered the warning in Kael's eyes. To offer pity would be to feed the curse. She forced herself to stand still, to breathe, to be, as he had commanded, nothing but a witness, an empty vessel, a stone. The moment she made that choice, the moment her compassion hardened into resolve, something shifted. The beast screamed, a sound of pure frustration, and the black veins on Kael's skin pulsed violently. The transformation intensified, his form becoming even more monstrous. But then slowly it began to recede. The black fire in his eyes dimmed, the veins faded, the claws retracted. His breathing, which had been ragged and harsh, began to even out. The beast was being forced back, drawn back into whatever dark place it lived inside him. The entire process took perhaps 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was finally over, Kael collapsed onto the floor, catching himself on one hand. He was drenched in sweat, trembling with exhaustion. He remained on one knee for a long moment, his head bowed, gathering himself. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes were gold again. Human. but they were haunted, filled with a weariness that went beyond physical exertion. It was the weariness of a man who had fought this battle every night for 200 years. "You held," he said, his voice a rough rasp. It was not quite praise, but it was close. "The first night, the first test, you held." Mira wanted to speak, to tell him she was sorry for what he endured, to offer some word of comfort, but she bit her tongue. She would not make that mistake. Not tonight, not ever. Cale pushed himself to his feet with visible effort. The aura of invincibility he had projected before the trial was gone, replaced by something far more human: vulnerability. He looked tired, older, wounded. "You may leave the circle," he said. Mira stepped out. The chalk marks stopped glowing immediately. The oppressive weight in the air lifted. She felt as if she could breathe again. "Go," Cale commanded, waving a dismissive hand. "The trial is over for tonight." As if summoned by his will, Maeve materialized from the shadows near the great doors. She stood motionless, waiting. Mira hesitated. She wanted to ask questions, wanted to understand what she had just seen. But Cale had already turned away, dismissing her. He was retreating behind his walls, hiding the cost of the night's battle. She gave a stiff, formal nod and turned to follow Maeve. As she walked toward the doors, she heard his voice one last time, so quiet she almost missed it. Almost, "Thank you." She did not turn back. She did not respond. She simply walked out of that vast hall and tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking, tried to forget the sound of his scream and the desperate plea in his eyes. 1 night down, 6 more to go. And she had the terrible feeling that the first night had been a mercy, and the real trials were still to come. Sleep did not come easily that first night. Mira lay in the bed in the East Tower, staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed the trial in endless, vivid detail. The sound of Cale's transformation, the black veins crawling across his skin like living things, the voice in her head, slick and persuasive, trying to make her break, and worst of all, the look in his eyes when the beast had taken him. Not mindless rage, but desperate, conscious suffering. He had been aware the entire time, trapped inside his own body, while the curse used him like a puppet. She finally gave up on sleep as dawn broke, gray and cold through her window. She dressed in the same practical clothes she had worn the day before and ventured out into the corridor. The castle was already awake. She could hear the sounds of activity below: boots on stone, the clang of weapons in the training yard, voices calling orders. Mira followed the sounds down through the keep, through corridors she half remembered from the previous evening. She emerged into the main courtyard just as the sun crested the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The training yard was full of soldiers running drills. Cormac stood at the center, barking corrections with the authority of a man who had spent 50 years teaching warriors how not to die. She stood at the edge, watching. The soldiers moved in perfect formation, their strikes synchronized, their footwork precise. These were not raw recruits. These were veterans, men and women who had survived campaigns and come out harder for it. But there was something in the way they moved, a tension in their shoulders, a tightness around their eyes. They were drilling for a war they knew was coming, and they were afraid they would not be ready. "You should be resting." The voice came from behind her. Finn, appearing as silently as he had the day before. "The first night takes a toll, even on those who do not realize it yet." "I could not sleep." Few can after witnessing the trials. He moved to stand beside her, watching the drills with a professional eye. "But you held your ground. That is more than the others managed on their first night." "It will get worse, will it not?" Finn's silence was answer enough. Mira watched the soldiers for another moment, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she woke. "The king, is he well?" "He is in the war room. He has been there since an hour past midnight, working on defense strategies." Finn glanced at her. "He does not sleep after the trials. The nightmares are worse than wakefulness." 200 years of sleepless nights after each trial. The thought was staggering. How had he not gone completely mad? "May I see him?" Finn's eyebrows rose slightly. "The war room is not usually open to civilians. I am the 4th witness to his curse. I would think that earns me some level of access." For a moment, she thought Finn would refuse. Then something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "Follow me, but do not expect a warm welcome. The king is focused when he is planning." The war room was on the second floor of the keep, accessed through heavy oak doors reinforced with iron bands. Finn pushed them open, revealing the space Mira had only glimpsed from outside the day before. It was larger than she had imagined, a chamber designed for command. Every wall was covered with maps showing the Frostclaw Range in meticulous detail. Troop positions marked with wooden pieces, blue for Shadow Peak forces, red for known Iron Peak raiders. Supply routes drawn in colored chalk, terrain features annotated in multiple hands, the accumulated wisdom of generations of tactical planning. In the center of the room stood a massive table bearing a three-dimensional model of the entire mountain range, carved in exquisite detail. Every ridge, every valley, every choke point rendered in miniature. Kale stood at the table with Cormac and two other commanders, deep in discussion. They were tracing routes on the model with their fingers, voices low and urgent. Kael looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but his posture was straight and his focus absolute. He was explaining something about defensive positions and supply lines, his tactical mind fully engaged despite the previous night's ordeal. One of the commanders, a woman with a scar across her throat and hair the color of autumn leaves, noticed Mira in the doorway. "We have a visitor." Every head turned. Kael's expression was unreadable when his golden eyes found her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he gestured to the table with a casual economy that suggested this was not entirely unexpected. "Mira Ashford, fourth witness. She signed the contract 3 days ago and survived the first trial last night." He said it matter-of-factly, as if reporting a tactical update. "Mira, Commander Reese of Reconnaissance." He indicated a lean man in his 40s with a scout's watchful eyes. "And Commander Tobin, our master of fortifications." The older, gray-haired man with an engineer's calculating gaze nodded briefly. The commanders acknowledged her with professional courtesy, but their expressions remained guarded. An outsider in the war room was clearly unusual. "I apologize for the intrusion," Mira said. "I wanted to ensure the king was well after last night." "He is functional," Cormac said, his tone matter-of-fact, which is what matters on a morning after trials. Kael's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not contradict the assessment. Instead, he returned his attention to the map. "We were discussing the northern approach. Garrick has been increasing patrol activity along this ridge." He pointed to a marked position. "It could be reconnaissance for a larger operation." Mira moved closer to the table, unable to resist the pull of the tactical problem. The three-dimensional model was remarkably detailed, and her father's training kicked in automatically. She studied the terrain, noting elevations, sight lines, natural choke points. Cormac watched her for a moment, then gestured to a cluster of red pieces. "This is our situation. Garrick has been massing troops here for 3 months. Scout reports put his numbers at 300 warriors, possibly more. We have 120. "The numbers are against us," Reese added quietly, "even with superior defensive positions." Mira studied the map, her father's voice echoing in her mind. "Terrain is everything, little bird. An army that knows the land can defeat a force 3 times its size." She traced the mountain passes with her eyes, the narrow defiles, the high ground. "You are planning a defensive retreat," she said slowly, recognizing the pattern. 3 fallback positions. She pointed to the marked locations. "Each one is a natural choke point. You force Garrick to pay for every mile." Kael's eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but with interest. "Continue." "But this third position," Mira pointed to the northernmost fallback point. "This pass is too wide. If Garrick gets cavalry through here, he can flank your main force and cut off your retreat to the citadel." Silence fell over the war room. Reese leaned forward, studying the position more closely. Tobin's expression shifted from skepticism to consideration. "She is right," Tobin said finally. "I did not see it before, but that pass is a vulnerability. We assumed the terrain would slow cavalry enough to prevent a flanking maneuver, but if they commit fully—" "We could collapse the pass," Cormac suggested. "Controlled avalanche, we have the equipment." "That would trap us on the wrong side of the range if we needed to retreat further," Reese pointed out. "Then make your stand before that becomes necessary," Mira said. She moved several blue pieces to a different position, a high ridge that overlooked the second fallback point. "Here, elevation advantage, clear sight lines to both approaches. Force Garrick to come to you, uphill, while you control the high ground." Kael was staring at her now with an intensity that made her skin prickle. That position has no water source. We could not hold it for more than 2 days. You need 3 days for reinforcements to arrive. Use the first fallback position for day 1, this ridge for day 2. By day 3, you will have the numbers to push back. Assuming reinforcements arrive on schedule, Reese said carefully. War always requires calculated risks, Mira replied. It was something her father had said often. War is a dance where one misstep means death. Tobin was nodding slowly, his engineer's mind working through the logistics. It is aggressive. It requires precise timing, but the tactical advantages are significant. Better than our current plan, Cormac admitted, though his tone suggested it cost him to say it. He looked at Mira with something that might have been the beginning of respect. Your father taught you well. Cale said nothing for a long moment, his golden eyes studying the repositioned pieces, his tactical mind running through scenarios, calculating odds. Finally, he nodded once, decisive. We implement it. Tobin, start preparing demolition equipment for the northern pass as a contingency. Reese, I want scouts on that ridge by noon. If there are weaknesses in the position we have not identified, I need to know before we commit forces. Sir? Both commanders moved immediately toward the door. As they left, Kyle looked at Mira with an expression she could not quite read. You have a tactical mind. I did not expect that. My father was at Granite Keep. He said you taught him to see the whole board, not just the next move. Something flickered in Cale's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Granite Keep was a long time ago. I was a different man then. Were you? Or are you simply the same man carrying a heavier burden? The question hung in the air between them. Cormac cleared his throat, the sound deliberate. I should coordinate with the commanders on the new positions. He left, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Alone with Kyle, Mira felt the weight of the previous night settle over her again. The trial, the curse, the desperate plea in his eyes when the beast had nearly broken free. You should not be in the war room, Cale said quietly. This is not your fight. The contract says otherwise. I read the clauses about assuming debts and responsibilities. If you fall before the 7th night, this becomes very much my fight. His jaw tightened. You were not supposed to understand those terms. Then they should not have been written in clear language. She met his gaze steadily. I know what I signed. I know the stakes. So yes, this is my fight too. For a moment, she thought he would argue. Instead, he let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You are dangerously clever, Mira Ashford. I survived the first night because I followed your instructions. I did not offer pity. I did not break. You survived because you are stronger than the others. He turned away from the map, facing her fully. In the morning light, the exhaustion was even more evident. The fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. But the trials will escalate. The curse adapts. What worked last night may not work tonight. Then I will adapt as well. It is not that simple. The curse feeds on emotion. Any strong feeling can become a weapon against you. His golden eyes held hers. Tonight, it will show you things designed to break you, memories from my past, things I have spent 2 centuries trying to forget. What should I expect? He was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much to tell her. It will show you Rowan, my brother, how he died. The curse will try to make you understand the full weight of my guilt, and it will use your compassion as a blade. Then I will not give it my compassion. Easier said than done when you are watching someone you have come to respect suffer for a crime he could not prevent. The admission hung between them. He respected her. After only 1 night and 1 morning, the legendary Alpha King respected her tactical mind and her strength. The knowledge settled something in Mira's chest. I will hold, she said simply, because I made a promise, and because your people need you functional. That is reason enough. Before Cale could respond, the door burst open. Reese stood there, his face tight with urgency. Your Majesty, scout report. Iron Peak forces are moving. They are heading for the 2nd fallback position. Cale's entire demeanor shifted instantly. The exhausted man vanished, replaced by the commander. How many? 50 warriors, fast-moving light cavalry. They will reach the position by nightfall. A probing force, Cale said immediately, his mind already working through implications. Garrick is testing our response time. He wants to see how quickly we can mobilize. He moved to the map, his hands sure despite the tremor of exhaustion. Get 30 warriors to that position, full armor and weapons. Make it visible. I want Garrick to think we are committing significant resources. "And the actual response?" Cormac asked, reappearing in the doorway behind Reese. 20 more through the eastern pass, hidden approach. If this is a trap, I want our own surprise waiting." Kael's golden eyes were hard, calculating. "And double the scouts on all approaches. I want to know if Garrick moves a single tent." "Already done, Your Majesty," Reese confirmed before disappearing. Kael braced his hands on the table, staring down at the miniature mountains and valleys. "He is moving faster than anticipated. The challenge is still 5 days away, but he is not waiting. He is pushing, testing for weaknesses." "Why not attack in force if he has the numbers?" Mira asked. "Because he is not certain of victory," Kael replied without looking up. "Garrick is ambitious, not foolish. He knows that even cursed and weakened, Shadow Peak Guard is formidable. A direct assault would cost him dearly, perhaps more than he is willing to pay. So he probes, looking for the crack in our defenses. Then we give him no cracks. That requires me to lead, and I cannot lead when half my time is spent fighting a war inside my own skin." He finally looked at her, and the frustration in his eyes was raw. "This is the trap I live in, Mira. I cannot fight because of the curse, but I cannot hide because of my position. Every choice is between two kinds of failure." The weight of it settled over her. Months of this, perhaps years. Watching his territory bleed while unable to take the field, knowing his very presence in battle could doom his own warriors. "6 more nights," she said quietly. "If we can hold for 6 more nights, you will be free." "If." The word carried the weight of 3 previous failures. That is a significant if. She wanted to promise him certainty, to offer guarantees where none existed, but she had learned from her father that false confidence was worse than honest fear. "I will do everything in my power to make it so." "Your power had better be considerable." He straightened, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shed the exhaustion that clung to him. "Go. Rest while you can. Tonight will be harder than last night, and tomorrow harder still." Mira nodded and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Kael, thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me with this." She gestured to the war room, the maps, the tactical discussions. "For treating me like a partner instead of a burden." Something in his expression softened. "You have earned it in 1 night. Most people do not earn my trust in a lifetime." The second night came too quickly. Mira spent the day making herself useful where she could. She helped Maeve coordinate supplies for the troops, organized medical stations, reviewed evacuation routes for civilians. The old woman worked her hard, seeming to understand that Mira needed the distraction, needed to keep her hands and mind occupied so the fear could not take root. As dusk approached, Maeve found her in the supply room, doing a final inventory of bandages. "It is time, child." They walked in silence through the corridors. Soldiers and servants moved past them, but everyone gave Mira a wide berth. Word had spread about who she was, what she was doing. She saw respect in some eyes, pity in others, fear in most. They knew what the trials were. They knew what happened to witnesses. "Maeve," Mira said as they reached the great doors of the throne room. "What was he like before the curse, before he lost Rowan?" The old woman was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes distant with memory. "He was the finest man I have ever known. Brilliant in battle, gentle in peace. He loved deeply. His brother, his people, the very idea of what a kingdom could be. That capacity for love made him the strongest alpha in generations." She paused, her voice thick with sorrow. "But it also made him vulnerable. When he lost Rowan, he lost the part of himself that believed in hope, and a man without hope is dangerous, child, to himself most of all." Before Mira could respond, Maeve pushed open the doors. The throne room waited, vast and shadowed. The massive fire roared in its hearth, but the heat felt hollow, warming nothing. The chalk circle gleamed faintly on the floor, already prepared. Kael stood at the center of the room, not on his throne, but on the floor like any other warrior preparing for battle. He wore simple black clothes, no crown, no royal insignia. When his eyes found hers, she saw dread in their golden depths, not of the curse itself, but of what she was about to witness. "You came," he said. "Did you think I would not?" "I hoped you would reconsider." But there was no real conviction in the words. Mira crossed to the chalk circle and stepped inside. The moment her feet crossed the line, the familiar weight of magic settled over her. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with power that made her skin prickle. "Last night was the warning," Kael said, his voice low and rough. Tonight, the curse will use everything it learned. It knows you will not run from fear, so it will try something else. What? Truth. The word was bitter. It will show you the truth of what I did, what I am, and it will use that truth to break you. Before Mira could ask what he meant, the change began. It was faster than the first night, more violent. One moment Kale was human, the next he was on his knees, black veins erupting across his skin like cracks in ice. The growl that tore from his throat was agony given voice. But this time, something else happened. The air around him shimmered and distorted, reality bending like heat haze. Images formed in the distortion, translucent but unmistakably real. Mira saw a younger Kale, perhaps 30 years old, laughing with another man who could only be Rowan. They were in a forest clearing, sparring with wooden practice swords. Their movements were fluid, synchronized. Two warriors who knew each other so perfectly they could anticipate every strike and counter. The love between them was visible in every gesture, every shared glance. The image shifted. Now they were in a great hall, warmer and more alive than the throne room where Mira stood. Rowan was painting, his fingers stained with color, while Kyle stood behind him offering suggestions. The casual intimacy of brothers who had never known a day apart. Another shift. A battlefield. Kyle in full armor, leading a charge. Rowan at his side, calling orders to the flanking units. They fought as one organism, two halves of a single tactical mind, invincible together. Then the images turned dark. Rowan in a sickbed, his skin the color of old ash, his breathing labored and wet. The plague. Kale kneeling beside him, gripping his brother's hand with desperate strength. "I will save you," the younger Kale promised. "I swear it, brother, just hold on." The voice in Mira's head returned, stronger than before, seductive and poisonous. Such devotion, such love. He would have done anything to save his brother. Can you not understand that? Can you not feel compassion for a man driven to desperate measures by love? Mira felt her chest tighten. The images were so vivid, so real. She could see the anguish in young Kyle's face, the terror of watching someone he loved slip away. This was not just memory. This was his deepest wound, laid bare. The vision shifted again. Kale in a dark place she recognized from stories. The Vale Marsh, where ancient entities dwelled and bargains were struck that should never be made. A figure appeared, wrapped in silver light that seemed to weep. The Weaver. She was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, perfect and terrible and absolutely without mercy. Her voice was silk over steel as she spoke. "What do you offer for your brother's life?" "Anything, everything, my life, my soul, my crown, name your price." "A life for a life," the Weaver said, her smile cold. "A soul for a soul. These are the terms. Do you accept?" "I accept. Take me, save him." "As you wish." The magic that flowed from Kale was visible, a golden light pouring from his chest like arterial blood. It streamed away through the dark, and as it left him, shadow rushed in to fill the void. The curse, black and writhing and hungry, burrowing into him like a parasite finding a host. And far away in the castle, Rowan gasped. The fever that had been killing him broke like a wave on stone. His eyes cleared, color returned to his face. His wolf, which had been dying inside him, stirred back to life. He sat up in bed, whole and healthy for the first time in weeks. "It worked," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "Kyle did it. He saved me." But even as joy spread across Rowan's face, his expression changed. Confusion first, then pain. His hand went to his chest. "Something is wrong. I feel—" Mira watched in horror as Rowan's newly restored life began to flicker and fade. The magic that had saved him was anchored to Kyle's soul, drawing power from that source to maintain the healing. But Kyle's soul was dying, consumed by the curse. And when the anchor dissolved, there was nothing left to sustain the miracle. Rowan had 5 minutes of perfect health, 5 minutes of thinking himself saved, of feeling strong and whole again, of believing his brother had succeeded, 5 minutes of joy. Then his heart simply stopped. He died with a smile on his face, believing until the very end that Kale had won. Back in the Vale March, Kale screamed. The sound was not human. It was the sound of a soul shattering. He had felt it through the connection, felt the moment Rowan's life ended, felt the terrible understanding crash over him. The Weaver had lied. The bargain had been rigged from the start. His love had been used to murder his brother. The images dissolved, and Mira found herself staring at the beast that Kale had become. Tears were streaming down her face. She had not realized she was crying. The tragedy of it was overwhelming. 5 minutes. Rowan had lived for 5 minutes before the cure became the poison. He suffered for nothing, the voice in her head whispered. 200 years of torment for a brother who died happy, believing himself saved. Is that not the cruelest irony? Does he not deserve your pity? Does he not deserve peace? The pull was almost irresistible. Mira wanted to step forward, to tell Kyle it was not his fault, to offer the forgiveness and absolution he so clearly needed. Her foot lifted, moving toward the edge of the circle. Then her father's voice cut through the fog of emotion. Sometimes, little bird, the enemy will offer you something true, a real vulnerability, a genuine weakness. But if you take it, if you commit to exploiting it, you will lose everything. The trap is not in the lie. The trap is in the truth, weaponized against you. This was the trap. The curse was using real memory, genuine tragedy, to manufacture her sympathy. Everything she had seen was true, but truth could be a weapon just as easily as lies. If she offered pity now, if she gave in to the overwhelming compassion flooding her chest, she would lose a piece of herself to the curse, and Kyle, already suffering under the weight of 2 centuries of guilt, would suffer more because she had been too weak to resist. Mira forced her foot back down inside the circle. She clenched her fists until her nails drew blood. She wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the unfairness of it all, but she did not. She stood, she witnessed, and she gave the curse nothing. The beast in Kale's body roared in frustration. The images shattered completely, dissolving like smoke. His transformation intensified, the human form disappearing almost entirely beneath fur and claw. He was more wolf than man now, a massive creature with eyes of black fire and teeth designed for tearing. But even as the beast raged, Mira could see the man underneath still fighting, the gold flickering behind the black, the human will refusing to surrender completely. The battle lasted longer this time, 20 minutes of transformation and resistance, of the curse throwing everything it had against Kale's defenses while Mira stood witness to the war. When it finally ended, when the beast was forced back and the man emerged, Kale did not catch himself. He simply fell, his body hitting the stone floor hard enough to echo. Mira was across the circle before the chalk stopped glowing. The trial was over. She could move. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hand hovering over his shoulder. He caught her wrist before she could touch him, his grip iron despite his exhaustion. His eyes, gold and haunted, met hers. "Do not," he rasped. "Do not pity me." "I do not pity you," Mira said, and realized the truth of it. "I am furious for you. The Weaver lied. She manipulated you. What happened to Rowan was not your fault. I made the bargain. She made the trap. There is a difference." Mira's voice was fierce. "You were a brother trying to save a brother. The crime is hers, not yours." Something in his expression cracked. For just a heartbeat, she saw desperate hope in his eyes, the hope of a man who wanted more than anything to believe her words. Then the walls came back up, and he released her wrist, pushing himself to sitting with visible effort. "You held," he said, his voice rough. "Second night, you held." "It was harder. It will only get harder from here." He looked at her, and the exhaustion went soul deep. 5 more nights, Mira. Can you endure 5 more nights of this?" "I can. I will." She stood, offering him her hand. He stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, he took it. His hand was large and warm, scarred from a lifetime of war. She helped him to his feet, taking more of his weight than she had expected. He was running on nothing but will. They stood in the empty hall, hands still clasped. 2 people bound by contract and circumstance, and now by shared battle. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not breaking, for not offering what the curse wanted." "Thank you for fighting," Mira replied. "I saw you in there holding it back. You could have surrendered. It would have been easier." "Nothing about this is easy." He released her hand, stepping back. "Go, rest. Tomorrow I need to address the Iron Peak probe, and tomorrow night—" He did not finish. "Tomorrow night I will hold again." As Mira walked toward the doors, his voice stopped her one more time. "You said you were furious for me. That is still emotion, Mira. The curse can use anger as easily as pity." She turned back. "Then what should I feel? What is safe?" "Nothing." His smile was grim. "To survive, you must feel nothing. But to feel nothing is to stop being human." So tell me, how do we win when the only path to victory requires us to lose ourselves? Mira had no answer. She left him standing in the shadows, a king fighting on two fronts, and wondered how much longer either of them could last. The third and fourth nights followed a pattern of escalation that left Mira questioning her own endurance. Night 3 brought not Rowan's death, but its aftermath. The curse showed her King Aldrich confronting his son. The old king's face twisted with horror and disgust as he stared at what Chaol had become. "You have damned us all," Aldrich said, his voice breaking. "You are no son of mine." The king turned his back on Chaol and walked away. 7 days later, his heart gave out. They said it was grief that killed him, but Mira saw the truth in the vision. It was shame. Aldrich had died ashamed of his own son, and Chaol had carried that rejection for 200 years. Night 4 brought physical agony instead of visions. The transformation was more complete, more violent. For terrifying minutes, Chaol's human form nearly disappeared entirely beneath the beast. The creature that emerged had no recognition in its eyes when it looked at Mira. Just hunger, just rage. The chalk circle held, but barely, the barrier flickering like a candle in hurricane wind. But at the last possible moment, a spark of gold appeared in the black, a tremor of humanity. Chaol fought his way back from the abyss and collapsed in a pool of his own blood, nose and ears bleeding from the strain. Each morning, he was more exhausted. Each morning, he still dragged himself to the war room, still made decisions, still led. And each time Mira saw him bent over maps, planning defenses despite barely being able to stand, she understood what Cormac had meant. This was not just duty. This was stubborn refusal to let the curse win, to let his people down, to become the monster his father had believed him to be. On the morning of the 5th day, everything changed. Finn brought the news to the war room where Mira was helping coordinate medical supplies with Maeve. "Scout report," he said, his face grim. "Iron Peak is moving. 200 warriors, heading for the southern border. They will be in striking position within 2 days. Chaol, who had been studying a supply manifest, looked up sharply. 2 days? That puts them at our doorstep on the eve of the 7th night. "It is not coincidence," Cormac said, entering behind Finn. "Garrick knows about the contract. He is timing his attack to your most vulnerable moment." "How does he know?" demanded Rhys, who had been mapping patrol routes. "The contract is supposed to be secret." "We have a leak," Chaol said flatly. "Or we had one. The 4th guard who disappeared the night Rowan died. Toreth. He must have gone to Garrick." Cormac's face went hard as stone. "I will find him." "He is with Iron Peak now," Chaol replied. "Has been for months, feeding Garrick intelligence. That is how they have known exactly when to strike, exactly where we are weakest." He slammed his fist on the table, the impact making wooden pieces jump. "I have been fighting blind while my enemy had perfect information." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. Every raid, every probing attack, every loss over the past months had been enabled by betrayal from within. "What do we do?" Tobin asked quietly. Chaol stared at the map for a long moment, his tactical mind working through scenarios. When he looked up, his eyes were cold calculation. "We use it. If Garrick thinks he knows our plans, we give him false information. We make him believe we are weaker than we are. We make him overconfident." "How?" demanded Rhys. Mira spoke before she fully thought through the implications. "The 5th night. Tonight. We make it look like the trial went catastrophically wrong, like I am on the verge of breaking." Every eye turned to her. Chaol's expression was unreadable. "You want to fake a failure," Cormac said slowly. "Not fake. Exaggerate." Mira looked at Chaol. "The trial will be difficult regardless. We simply let people see that difficulty. Let word spread that the witness is failing, that the king is losing control. Garrick will hear within hours, and he will rush his attack, become careless. That requires the trial to look catastrophic while you actually maintain control," Chaol said. "That is threading a needle while the needle is on fire." "Do we have a better option?" Silence. They did not. "If you truly break," Chaol said quietly, "if the act becomes reality, everything fails. The contract, the defense, everything." "I understand the stakes." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Tonight we stage a crisis. Tomorrow we spread rumors. By the 6th day, Garrick will be convinced victory is within reach." He looked at Cormac. "Prepare an ambush at the narrow pass, 80 of our best. When Garrick commits to his assault, we make him bleed. When do we spring the trap? The 6th night. While I am in trial, you will be killing his advance force. By the 7th dawn, he will be angry, reckless, and committed to a direct assault, which is exactly where we want him. It was a dangerous plan built on deception and perfect timing, but it was the only advantage they had. As the council dispersed to make preparations, Kael caught Mira's arm. This could go wrong in 1,000 ways. If you truly break tonight, there is no recovery. I will not break. You cannot know that. I know that I have survived 4 nights. I know what is at stake, and I know that I am not the first 3 witnesses. She met his eyes. Trust me. I do. The admission seemed to surprise him. That is what terrifies me. Because if I am wrong, if my trust is misplaced, the cost will be, then do not be wrong. She squeezed his arm once, and I will not break. That night, as dusk fell and the time for the 5th trial approached, Mira stood in her room and prepared herself. She would have to walk a razor's edge tonight, appear to be breaking while actually holding firm. Let the fear show without letting it consume her. It would be the performance of her life, and thousands of lives depended on her getting it right. Maeve came for her as the last light faded. The castle is watching tonight, the old woman said quietly. Word has spread that something significant will happen. Be careful, child. The line between performance and reality is thinner than you think. I know. Do you? Maeve's ancient eyes searched her face. Because once you start down this path, there is no turning back. You will have to commit completely, or Garrick will see through the deception. Then I will commit completely. They walked to the throne room in silence. The corridors felt heavier tonight, charged with anticipation. Soldiers lingered near doorways, pretending to be busy but clearly waiting. They wanted to see what happened, wanted to know if the 4th witness would succeed where the others had failed. The throne room doors stood open. Kael waited inside, and when his eyes met hers, she saw the apology there. He knew what he was about to put her through, knew the trial would be worse than ever before because they needed it to appear catastrophic. Ready? He asked. Always. She stepped into the circle. The chalk flared bright, brighter than it ever had before, and as the sun touched the horizon, the 5th trial began. It was not an act. That was the first thing Mira understood. There would be no pretending tonight. The curse came like a tidal wave, overwhelming and absolute. Everything that had come before was merely preparation for this. The beast that emerged when Kael transformed was more complete than she had ever seen. Nearly full wolf, massive and terrible, with claws that gouged stone and eyes that burned with black fire. And it was intelligent, calculating. It had learned from 4 nights of failure. The voice in her head was not a whisper. It was a scream. He is lost. The man is gone. Only the monster remains. Run before it devours you. The beast stalked toward the chalk line, testing the barrier. When it could not cross, it began to circle, looking for weakness. And then it did something new. It showed her not the past, but possible futures. Mira saw Garrick's army sweeping through the mountains, villages burning, her own mother, healed by the contract, dying in the raids because the magic that saved her was anchored to a kingdom that no longer existed. Children screaming, families torn apart, blood on snow. This is what your failure creates, the curse hissed. Every death will be your fault. The weight of it was crushing. Mira fell to her knees inside the circle, her breath coming in gasps. This was not about Kael's guilt anymore. This was about hers, about the responsibility she had taken on when she signed the contract. Let go, the voice urged. Just break. Your mother will live. You will survive. Is that not enough? It would have been enough 4 days ago, but not now. Now she knew these people. Cormac's gruff loyalty, Finn's quiet strength, Maeve's stubborn hope, the soldiers drilling in the yard, the servants who had given her respectful nods. They all depended on her holding. The beast roared and slammed against the barrier. The chalk line shattered. For one frozen moment, Mira thought death had come. But then she felt it. The barrier was not in the chalk. The chalk was just a focus. The real wall was in her will, in her determination not to break. And that wall held. The beast could sense it. Frustration and fury radiated from it as it prowled at the edge of the invisible barrier, unable to cross. And behind the rage, Mira saw something else. Fear. The curse was losing. Deep inside the beast, Kael fought. The gold began to return to his eyes, the transformation reversed, slow and agonizing. When he finally emerged fully human, blood was streaming from his nose, his ears, even his eyes. He looked like he was dying. He swayed and nearly fell, caught himself. "Mira," he gasped, "run! I cannot hold it." But she could see the truth. The beast was beaten. It was his own fear talking now. "The trial is over," she said. Her voice shook, but it was firm. "You held. You won." He looked at her with eyes that were human but destroyed. "If you can survive one more night, we will survive it together." The doors burst open. Cormac, Finn, and 3 warriors rushed in, swords drawn. They saw Kael on his knees, blood covering his face. They saw Mira trembling inside the broken circle, her dress torn, her face pale as death. "Gods," Cormac breathed. "What happened?" Kael pushed himself to his feet with visible effort. When he spoke, his voice was carefully pitched to carry to the watching warriors. The trial was more difficult than previous nights. The witness held, but barely. He looked at Mira, and she saw the apology in his eyes for what he was about to say. "I do not know if she can survive another night like this." Mira let her shoulders slump, let exhaustion show in every line of her body. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I tried to be strong enough." "You were strong enough," Kael said gently, "but the curse is too powerful. No human could withstand 7 nights of this. I was a fool to believe otherwise." The performance was working. She could see it in the warriors' faces. Pity, fear, the certainty that the 4th witness was failing just like the others. By morning, Garrick would know, and he would make his move. "Maeve, take her to her room," Kael ordered. "She needs rest." As the old woman helped Mira from the throne room, she heard Kael giving orders behind her, doubling guards, preparing for what came after the contract failed, playing his part perfectly. In her room, Maeve closed the door and turned to her. "You held." "It was not a question," Mira nodded. "Barely. The king was right to fear. That trial was worse than any I have witnessed." The old woman's face was troubled. "If the 6th night is worse still, then I will survive the 6th night." Mira sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how close she had come to actually breaking. The line between performance and reality had been razor thin. "We need Garrick to believe I am failing. It is the only way. And if he does not take the bait, he will. He has been waiting for this moment. He will not let it pass." Maeve was quiet for a moment. Then she sat in the chair by the fire. "There is something you should know about the contract, about what happens when it completes." Mira looked up. "What?" "The terms say you will assume his debts and responsibilities, but they also say a soul for a soul. Most believe that means your soul will be taken and his will be freed. But I have studied the old magic, and I think it means something else." "What?" "I think it means an exchange, not a taking, but a giving. Your soul will flow into him, filling the void the curse created. And his burden, his curse, will flow into you. You will become what he was, and he will become what you are." The implications took Mira's breath away. "You are saying I would become cursed. He would become human." "I am saying the balance must be maintained. A cursed alpha must exist. If he is freed, someone else must take his place." Maeve's eyes were ancient and sad. "I tell you this now because you need to know what you are walking toward. Tomorrow night is the 6th trial, the night after that, the 7th, and if you complete the contract, you may not survive it in any form you recognize." Mira thought about that, about becoming what Kael was, about centuries of torment, of fighting the beast inside her own skin, about Kael being free but her taking his place in the nightmare. "If that is the price," she said slowly, "then I will pay it. Because he has carried this burden for 200 years. He deserves freedom. And if I can give him that," she met Maeve's eyes, "then I will." "Even knowing it will destroy you?" "I signed a contract. I knew there would be a price. This is simply higher than I anticipated." Mira lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "How long do I have before the decision becomes irreversible?" "The 7th dawn. Once the final trial completes, the magic will activate. There will be no stopping it. Then I have 2 nights to decide if I can live with the consequences." But even as she said it, Mira knew the decision was already made. She had come too far, invested too much, to turn back now. Whatever the contract demanded, she would give it. Because some debts were worth paying, even when the cost was everything. Tomorrow would bring the 6th trial, and the day after, the 7th, and then she would learn the true price of saving a king. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, knowing sleep would not come, knowing that the hardest battles were still ahead, but at least she would not face them alone. Dawn broke cold and merciless on the 6th day, painting the mountains in shades of blood and gold. Mira woke before first light, her body aching from the previous night's ordeal. The 5th trial had not been performance. It had been survival, and she had barely managed it. She dressed in practical clothes, braided her hair back from her face, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman who stared back was harder than the one who had arrived 7 days ago, eyes that had witnessed things no human should see. But she was still standing, still whole, still determined. Maeve's words from his previous night echoed in her mind. An exchange, not just a taking. If the contract completed, Mira would become cursed and Kale would be freed. She would take his place in the nightmare while he stepped into the light. The thought should have terrified her. Perhaps it did, but she had made her choice when she signed the contract, and she would not unmake it now. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Finn, his stone face showing the faintest trace of concern. "The king requests your presence. War room, immediately." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. What happened? Garrick took the bait. The war room was crowded when Mira arrived. Kale stood at the center table with Cormac, Rhys, Tobin, and a woman Mira had not met before. She was striking with a scar across her throat and eyes that had seen too many battles. Her bearing spoke of command. "Mira Ashford," Kale said without preamble. "This is Alpha Sienna of Oakvale Pack. She arrived this morning with 60 warriors, more than she had promised." Sienna inclined her head in greeting. "The witness who did not break. I have heard much about you." "You arrived quickly," Mira said. "When Kale sends word that he is finally ready to face his curse, I do not delay." Sienna's scarred face was serious. "I owe him my brother's life. This is a small repayment." Kale gestured to the map. "Scout reports came in an hour ago. Garrick's army is moving faster than anticipated. The false information about last night's trial reached him before midnight. He is abandoning caution." "How many?" Mira asked, moving to study the positions. 250 warriors, full assault force." Cormac's finger traced their route. "They will be in position to attack by late afternoon tomorrow, the 7th day." "He is coordinating with the trial," Tobin said grimly. "He knows the 7th night is when you will be most vulnerable. He plans to hit us then." Kale's jaw was tight. "The timing is perfect for him. I will be in the throne room fighting the curse while my people are fighting for their lives outside. I cannot be in both places." "You do not need to be," Mira said, the strategy forming even as she spoke. "What if we change the timing? Start the trial at dawn instead of dusk?" Every head turned to stare at her. "That is insane," Rhys said flatly. "The curse is weakest at night. During the day it would be nearly uncontrollable." "Exactly," Mira replied. "The curse has adapted to our pattern. 7 nights, same timing. What if we break the pattern, force it to fight on unfamiliar ground?" Kale was studying her with those unnervingly intense gold eyes. "You are suggesting we gamble everything on unpredictability, giving us an edge." "I am suggesting we stop letting the curse dictate terms." She met his gaze. "If we start the trial at dawn, when Garrick attacks, you can finish it faster. Be free to fight when your warriors need you most." "Or it could kill us both," Kale said quietly. "Probably. But if we wait for dusk, Garrick wins by default. This way we are fighting on our terms." Sienna was nodding slowly. "It is audacious, reckless, but the tactical advantages are real. If Kyle can complete the trial before the main assault." "Then I lead the defense myself," Kale finished. "Free of the curse, at full strength." He looked at Mira. "You understand what you are proposing? A dawn trial will be exponentially more difficult. The curse will be chaotic, unpredictable." "I understand." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Dawn trial. Cormac, you will lead the initial defense. Hold them at the first choke point for as long as possible. Sienna, your warriors form the mobile reserve. When I emerge from the trial, we counterattack in force." "And if you do not emerge?" Rhys asked quietly. "Then Cormac assumes command, and you retreat to Oakvale with as many civilians as you can save." Kale's voice was flat, final. "But that is not the outcome we are planning for." The council continued, refining tactics, coordinating timing, preparing for every contingency. But Mira's attention kept drifting to Kale. He looked exhausted, running on will and little else. 5 nights of trials had ground him down. Tonight would be the 6th. Tomorrow dawn, the 7th. If they survived that long. As the meeting dispersed, Kale caught her arm. A moment. When they were alone, he turned to face her fully. What you proposed, the Dawn trial, it is brilliant and suicidal in equal measure. Most good tactics are. This is not tactics. This is survival. His grip on her arm tightened slightly. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if the trial becomes too much and you need to break the contract, I want you to do it. Do not sacrifice yourself for me. That is not your choice to make. Mira, I signed a contract, Kale. I knew the risks. And I am telling you now, I will see this through. She covered his hand with hers. Tomorrow we end this, together, whatever it costs. He looked at her with an expression she could not name. Gratitude and fear and something deeper, something that made her chest tighten. If we survive tomorrow, he said quietly, I owe you a debt I can never repay. Then do not try to repay it. Just live. Actually live, not just survive. That is all I ask. That is not how debts work. Then consider it a request from someone who cares what happens to you. The admission felt dangerous, but true. His hand turned under hers, their fingers lacing together. After tomorrow, if the curse breaks, I will try. That is all I can promise. It is enough. They stood there, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Tomorrow would bring battle and blood. Tonight would bring the 6th trial, but in this moment, they had peace, and it would have to sustain them through what was coming. The 6th trial came with twilight, and it brought something Mira had not anticipated. Intelligence. The curse had learned. It knew fear would not break her, knew visions of the past had failed. So it tried a new strategy. It showed her futures, not of death and destruction, but of life, of possibility. As the beast emerged from Kael's transformation, more complete and terrible than ever before, the visions began. She saw Kael free of the curse, whole and healthy. She saw him leading his people not in war, but in peace, rebuilding, thriving. And in every vision she was there, beside him, with him. They stood on the battlements watching the sunset, his hand warm in hers. They sat in the solarium surrounded by living green things, his laughter echoing off glass walls. They faced a council of allied alphas as partners, equals, a unified front. The curse's voice was almost tender. He wants this, wants you. But it can never happen. The contract will destroy one of you, perhaps both. Would it not be kinder to end this now, to break and spare you both the agony? Mira felt her heart crack, because the visions were not entirely lies. She had seen the way Kael looked at her when he thought she was not watching, had felt the current between them. In another life, they could have had something real. But this was not another life. This was a throne room in a cursed castle on the 6th night of a contract that demanded everything. No, she said aloud, you will not use hope as a weapon. You have already poisoned his grief. You will not poison his future. The beast snarled and lunged at the invisible barrier. The impact was tremendous, reality itself seeming to shudder. The barrier held, but Mira felt it weakening. One more night, just one more night, and the contract would complete. If she could survive that long. The beast did something it had never done before. It spoke. Mira. The voice was Kael's, but twisted, wrong. Help me, please. I cannot fight it anymore. You have to help me. Every instinct screamed at her to respond, to reach out. But she had learned. The curse would use anything, even his voice, even his desperate plea. Kael would never ask me to break the contract, she said firmly. He would rather die than put that burden on me. The beast's face contorted with rage. It roared and slammed both fists against the barrier. The invisible wall cracked. For one terrifying moment, Mira thought it would break through. But then she understood. The barrier was not magic imposed from outside. It was her will, her determination, and that could not be broken by force. The beast could not cross, and behind its rage she saw fear. The curse was losing, and it knew it. Deep inside the monstrous form, Kael fought. She could see it in the flicker of gold behind the black fire, in the way the beast's movements were slightly restrained, as if chains held it back. He was still there, still fighting. The transformation began to reverse, slowly, painfully. When Kael finally emerged, blood was running from every orifice. His body shook with exhaustion so profound he could barely stand. One more night, he gasped. One more trial, and this is over. We will survive it. Mira said. She crossed to him, steadying him when he swayed. Together. He looked at her, and his eyes held something that made her breath catch. What did it show you? The visions? Futures, possibilities. Good ones or bad ones? Both. She would not tell him what she had seen, would not burden him with knowledge of futures that could never be. It does not matter. What matters is holding until dawn. He nodded, too exhausted to press. As Maeve and Finn helped him from the throne room, Mira stood alone in the vast space and let herself feel, just for a moment, the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow, they would face the final trial. And whether she became cursed in Kael's place, whether the contract destroyed them both, or whether some third option presented itself, everything would be decided. She thought of her father, of her mother, alive and well because of a bargain made in desperation, of the people in this castle who had become more than strangers, of the king who had carried an impossible burden for 2 centuries and deserved freedom. "One more night," she whispered to the empty hall, "just one more." And she left to prepare for the battle that would decide everything. The 7th day dawned clear and cold, the sky painted in shades that promised either glory or blood. Mira woke in darkness, unable to sleep past the hour when soldiers began their preparations. She could hear them in the courtyard below, the ring of steel being sharpened, the low murmur of warriors making peace with their gods. Today, everything would be decided. She dressed in the simple, practical clothes she had worn all week, braided her hair back, looked at herself one final time in the mirror. The woman who looked back was a stranger, harder, older, someone who had witnessed the impossible and survived it, someone who was about to walk into the final trial knowing she might not walk out. A soft knock. Maeve, her ancient face etched with concern. "It is time, child." They walked through corridors that felt heavier than usual, charged with anticipation and dread. Warriors they passed gave Mira nods of respect. She had survived 6 nights. She had earned her place among them. The throne room was already prepared, the chalk circle drawn larger than before. Kael stood at its center, and when he looked at her, she saw everything in his eyes. Gratitude, fear, hope, resignation. 1,000 emotions compressed into a single gold stare. "The scouts report Garrick is 2 hours out," he said without preamble. "He is moving in full force, no subtlety. He believes he is catching us weakened and desperate. Then we show him he was wrong." Mira stepped into the circle. The chalk flared instantly, magic recognizing this was the final trial. "Mira," Kael's voice stopped her. "Before we begin, I need to tell you something. Save it for after we survive. If we do not survive, it needs to be said." He moved closer, until only a few feet separated them. "These 6 days, you have given me something I thought lost forever. Hope. Not just for freedom from the curse, but hope that I could be more than what I have been, that I could deserve a future worth living." His voice dropped lower. "Whatever happens in the next hour, I want you to know that you saved me long before this trial began." Mira's throat tightened. "Kael!" "Now I'm going to try to save you." He stepped back. "The contract says your soul will seal the curse, but I think there is another way. What if instead of you taking the curse, we destroy it together?" "How?" "I do not know yet, but I felt it last night, when you stood against the beast. The curse weakened not because you gave it nothing, but because you gave me something. Strength, support, partnership." His eyes burned with intensity. "The Weaver designed this contract to isolate, to separate. What if we refuse that separation? What if we face the final trial as one?" "That is not how the magic works." "Then we make it work differently." He held out his hand. "Trust me, one last time." Mira looked at his outstretched hand, at the king who had become so much more than a contract obligation, at the man who had fought for 200 years and refused to stop fighting now. She took his hand, together. Their fingers laced, and power flared where their skin touched. The contract, sensing something unexpected, pulsed with silver light. And as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, the 7th trial began. It did not come as a wave or an explosion. It came as an inevitability. The curse rose in Kael like a tide, and this time it brought everything. Every ounce of power accumulated over 2 centuries, every drop of poison that had been fed by guilt and grief and isolation. The transformation was instant and total. Kael's human form disappeared beneath the beast, and the creature that emerged was massive, more wolf than anything, but wrong in ways that hurt to perceive. It towered over Mira, and its eyes were black voids that promised oblivion. But Kael's hand never released hers. Even as his body changed, even as the curse consumed his form, he held on. And through that connection, Mira felt everything. She felt 200 years of pain compressed into a single moment. The weight of Rowan's death, the shame of his father's rejection, the loneliness of centuries spent isolated, unable to trust anyone, unable to let anyone close. It was agony beyond anything physical. It was a soul being slowly crushed under the weight of its own guilt. The curse screamed in her mind, trying to use the connection to flood into her, trying to make her the new vessel. But Mira did something the curse did not expect. She did not resist. She opened herself to it, accepted it, and as it flowed into her, she poured something else back through the connection. Love. Not romantic love, though there was an edge of that. Not pity or sympathy, which the curse could twist, but pure, unconditional acceptance. The recognition of another soul that had suffered and survived and deserved peace. She loved Kael for his strength and his weakness, for his tactical brilliance and his terrible mistakes, for the king he had been and the man he could become. And love, she discovered, was anathema to the curse. The curse had been born from a transaction, from a bargain made in desperation and sealed with lies. It fed on isolation, on grief, on the poison of guilt turned inward. But love was not transactional. Love given freely, expecting nothing in return, broke every rule the curse understood. The magic of the contract tried to complete its terms, tried to transfer Kael's curse to Mira, to swap their positions as Maeve had warned. But the curse, encountering Mira's love, began to burn away. Not transferred, but transformed. The poison meeting an antidote it could not survive. The beast roared, not with Kael's voice or Mira's, but with its own, the sound of ancient magic being forced to recognize defeat. Silver and black light exploded through the throne room, shattering windows, cracking stone. And in that explosion, the contract rewrote itself. The original terms demanded a soul for a soul, a curse transferred to maintain balance. But Mira and Kael had found a third option. Not isolation, but partnership. Not transaction, but gift. The magic, confronted with something it had not anticipated, was forced to adapt. Instead of the curse transferring to Mira, it split between them. The poison divided and diluted. What had been unbearable for one became survivable for two. And in that division, weakened by love and shared burden, the curse began to die. Not instantly, not cleanly, but it started to burn away, consumed by the very thing it could never touch. When the light faded, two figures stood in the throne room. Kael fully human, his eyes clear gold flecked with green. The curse was gone from him, burned away, free. And Mira, still human, but changed. Her eyes were amber touched with gold. Black veins traced faint patterns up her arms where the curse had touched her before being destroyed. She had scars, marks that would never fade. But she was not cursed. She was something new, something between human and wolf, marked by what she had endured, but not broken by it. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both alive against all odds. "You did it," Kael whispered. His voice was different, lighter, unburdened. "You freed me." "We did it," Mira corrected. Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion. "Together." Outside, the sounds of battle erupted. Garrick's forces had engaged. Warriors were fighting and dying while they stood in the throne room. Kael's head snapped toward the sound, every instinct roaring to life. For the first time in 200 years, he could fight without fear of the beast emerging. "I need to go. My people need me." "Then go. I am right behind you." He grabbed her hand one more time, squeezing hard. "Thank you for everything." Then he was running, moving with speed and grace she had never seen from him, unchained, unleashed. He hit the courtyard and shifted in mid-stride, his wolf form emerging smooth and controlled. No curse, no black veins, just pure, magnificent power. A massive silver wolf with eyes of molten gold, an alpha in truth. Mira followed, her new hybrid body faster and stronger than her human form had ever been. She did not know how to fight, but she knew tactics. And she could help coordinate, could use her position to see the battlefield and call adjustments. The battle was chaos. Iron Peak warriors had breached the outer defenses and were fighting in the courtyard itself. But when Kale appeared, when the warriors saw their king in full wolf form with no curse holding him back, a roar went up. Hope made manifest. Kale tore into the enemy lines like a force of nature. Where he went, his warriors rallied. The tide began to turn. Mira found Cormac directing the defense from a raised platform. "The king is free!" she shouted over the din. "The curse is broken!" Cormac's scarred face split in a fierce grin. "Then we show these Iron Peak bastards what Shadow Peak can do at full strength." The battle raged for 2 hours. Brutal and desperate, the kind of fight where victory balanced on a knife edge. But Shadow Peak had advantages Garrick had not anticipated. A king unchained, a witness who had become something unexpected, warriors fighting for their homes. When Garrick himself finally appeared, forcing his way toward Kyle, the outcome was already decided. The two alphas met in the center of the courtyard. Garrick was huge, scarred, powerful. He had terrorized the borderlands for months. But Kale was free, and he was not alone. Mira and Cormac fought at his flanks. Sienna and her Oakvale warriors pressed from the right. Finn and his scouts from the left. It was not a duel. It was a pack bringing down a threat to their survival. Garrick fell beneath their combined assault. When his throat was torn open by Kale's jaws, when his blood stained the snow, the remaining Iron Peak forces broke. They fled into the mountains, leaving their dead behind. The battle was over. Shadow Peak had won. Kale shifted back to human form, standing over Garrick's corpse. Blood covered him, but his eyes were clear, uncursed, free for the first time in 2 centuries. He found Mira in the crowd and crossed to her. "It is over, truly over." She nodded, suddenly aware of how much her new body ached. The hybrid form had given her strength, but she had still been in a battle. "Your people are safe, because of you." He reached out, his hand gentle as it touched her face. "The contract, the curse, all of it. You saved us. We saved each other." Around them, warriors were cheering. The victory, the king's freedom, the end of months of terror. But Kyle and Mira stood in a pocket of quiet, just looking at each other. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" He smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way she had never seen. "Now we find out what living actually means." 6 months later, Mira stood on the battlements of Shadow Peak Citadel and watched the sun set over mountains that were finally at peace. The castle had transformed. Markets bustled in the courtyard. Children played where soldiers had once drilled. Life had returned to a place that had been a tomb for too long. The scars remained. On the castle, on the people, on her. The black veins on her arms had faded, but never disappeared. Her eyes were still amber gold, a permanent mark of what she had become. She was not fully human anymore, but she was not cursed either. She was something new, a bridge between 2 worlds. The scholars had been fascinated. They called her the first of a new kind, a hybrid born not from birth, but from the death of an ancient curse. They wanted to study her, to understand how the magic had changed her. She had politely declined. Kyle appeared beside her, his presence as warm and solid as it had been every day for 6 months. He moved differently now, freer. The weight he had carried for 2 centuries was gone, though shadows still touched his eyes sometimes. Nightmares about Rowan, about the curse, about all the years lost. But they were just nightmares now, not reality. "Cormac is looking for you," he said. "Something about logistics for the Spring Trade Summit." "Tell him I will be there in a moment." She smiled. "He just likes having someone else to argue with about supply routes." Kale laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. He did that now, laughed without the weight of centuries crushing it into bitterness. "He respects you. They all do." Mira had stayed, of course. The contract might have been completed, but she was bound to Shadow Peak now, not by magic, but by choice. She had earned her place beside the king who ruled it, not as alpha, but as partner, co-leader, the woman who had seen him at his worst and chose to stay anyway. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. Kale took her hand, the gesture natural after months of finding excuses to touch, to reassure themselves the other was real. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Signing the contract? Taking the curse into yourself?" Mira thought about the girl she had been 7 months ago, desperate to save her mother, unaware of what she was walking into. She thought about everything she had endured, everything she had become. The scars she carried would never fade. She would never be fully human again. "No," she said finally. "I regret nothing." "Even the scars?" "Especially the scars." She turned her arm, looking at the black veins in the fading light. "They remind me of what we survived. They remind me that love is stronger than curses, that partnership can defeat what isolation cannot." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I spoke with the scholars about your condition. They have a theory about what you have become." "And?" "They believe the curse did not transfer to you because we changed the fundamental nature of the transaction. The Weaver's magic was designed to isolate, to punish through loneliness. But we refused to be isolated. We stood together." He squeezed her hand. "So instead of the curse finding a new host, it encountered something it could not survive. Love, partnership, two souls choosing to carry the burden together." "Poetic." "True." He turned to face her fully. "There is something else." A message came from the Eastern Territories. Another cursed alpha. He heard what happened here, how we broke an ancient contract through shared sacrifice. He is asking for help. "What did you tell him?" "That I would consult with my partner before making decisions." His smile was gentle. "We are in the curse-breaking business now, apparently, if you are willing." Mira thought about another soul trapped as Kael had been, another kingdom suffering under ancient magic gone wrong, another chance to prove that the pattern could be broken. "I am willing," she said, "but not today. Today we have earned our peace." "Agreed." He was quiet for a moment, then added softly, "There is one more thing I need to tell you. About Rowan." She waited, sensing this was important. "The curse showed you how he died. 5 minutes of health before his heart stopped. 5 minutes thinking himself saved." Kael's voice was thick with old grief. "For 200 years, I tortured myself with that memory. 5 minutes of hope before death. It seemed like the cruelest joke. And now? Now I realize he had something I did not. He had peace. He died believing I had succeeded, believing my love had saved him. He did not die in pain or fear or betrayal. He died happy." Kael's eyes were bright. "You gave me more than freedom from the curse, Mira. You gave me perspective. Rowan had 5 minutes. You gave me the rest of my life, and that is a gift I will never take for granted." Mira felt tears prick her eyes. "He would be proud of you, of what you have built here, of who you have become." "I hope so." He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into his warmth. "I spoke with my council, about us, about what we are to each other." Her heart stuttered. "What did they say?" "That it was about time I stopped being an idiot and acknowledged that the woman who saved my kingdom deserves a formal position." He was smiling now, nervous in a way she rarely saw. "They want to name you co-alpha, full partner in leadership, equal authority." "That is not how pack law works. It is how it used to work. Centuries ago, before alphas decided they had to rule alone." His hands framed her face, gentle and sure. "I do not want to rule alone, Mira. I have done that for 200 years, and it nearly destroyed me. I want to rule with you, fight with you, build with you. You are asking me to be your partner. I am asking you to be my everything." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I am asking you to take a broken king and help him become the leader his people deserve. I am asking for a lifetime, not 7 nights." Mira looked at him, this man who had endured the impossible and emerged with his honor intact, who had learned to hope again, to laugh again, to trust again, who saw her not as a human or a hybrid or a witness, but simply as Mira, someone worth fighting for. "Yes," she said, "to all of it, yes." He kissed her then, and it was not the desperate kiss of 2 people who thought they were dying. It was the kiss of 2 people who had survived hell and chosen each other anyway, the first kiss of the rest of their lives. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were emerging, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. Kael pointed to a constellation that had appeared in the months since the curse broke. "The scholars say it appeared the night we destroyed the curse. A new constellation." He traced its shape. 2 wolves, intertwined, the bonded, a reminder that some battles cannot be won alone. "I like it," Mira said softly. They stood together as full dark fell, 2 figures silhouetted against the stars. The castle below was lit with warm light, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of laughter drifting up. Life had returned, hope had returned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had this, each other. and the knowledge that they had faced the worst magic could throw at them and survived it together. "Tell me something," Cale said as they turned to go back inside. "If you could go back to that moment in your village when you were signing the contract, would you do it again, knowing everything that would happen?" Mira thought about the trials, the fear, the pain, the moment she thought she would break, the transformation that had left her permanently changed, and she thought about what she had gained: partnership, purpose, a place to belong, a man worth fighting for. "Every time," she said, "I would sign that contract every single time." "Even knowing the cost?" "Especially knowing the cost, because some prices are worth paying, some debts are worth the burden, and some loves are worth any sacrifice." He pulled her close as they walked back into the warm light of the castle. "The Blood Moon contract is broken, the Weaver is bound, the curse is destroyed, but what we built in its place is unbreakable," Mira finished. "Not a bargain, not a transaction, a choice, made freely, made with love. And it will last," Cale said softly, "far longer than any curse." They stepped inside together, into the warmth and light and life they had fought so hard to protect. The castle welcomed them, no longer a tomb, but a home. The throne room where they had fought their battles was being converted into a council hall. The solarium where the dead tree had sprouted leaves now bloomed with flowers. Everywhere, life was reclaiming what death had stolen. And in the center of it all, two people who had refused to let ancient magic define their story, who had taken a contract meant to separate and used it to unite, who had looked at impossible odds and decided to fight anyway. The witness who did not break. The king who learned to hope. Together they had rewritten the rules, and they would spend the rest of their lives proving that love, freely given, was stronger than any curse the universe could devise. The end.